facilitators. Since 2018, I started a book series on architecting collaboration, and my latest book, in co-authorship with other renowned digital facilitators and guest co-authors, is titled Beyond Virtual Meetings. It's all about the importance of the digital tools that can extend and augment the power of you as a facilitator and a meeting host in a virtual online meeting, but also on the hybrid meetings that are going to be so much needed in this post-pandemic era.
Along with my co-author Martin Duffy and esteemed PhD colleague, we host Talk to Your Meeting Daughter, a series of hosted conversations with meeting experts that can advise you about how to transition to this new normal and take advantage of this incredible once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make the organization of your meetings more sustainable. Please stand by as the next show will start momentarily.
Welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Paul.
A little bit of a background in our town, but it's good to be here again with all of you today and for another episode of Talk to Your Meeting Doctors. How about that, Martin?
Yeah, no, that was a good intro. Nice to see some of the faces that we've and the people that we've interacted with in the past. We've had some really interesting conversations over the last 6 or 9 months, for sure.
Absolutely. And we're raising the bar every time we got more and more renowned speakers on board, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
plus the diversity of topics. I think it reflects what actually happens in meetings, diversity of meetings, subject matter, people, settings. It all encompasses the areas that we have talked about. So I think it's very apt.
Fantastic. And it's really a pleasure to have here today Douglas and Gustavo. I think they will be going to introduce themselves in a minute because we normally ask you to please share with our viewers something that you're normally not sharing in this kind of public events and public gatherings, right? And starting alphabetically, Douglas, over to you.
Hi, Douglas Ferguson. I'm the founder of Voltage Control. We're a change agency, so we help organizations thrive through change, whether that's through training or coming in and helping unpack problems such as poor meeting culture or just leadership or other issues. And gosh, something fun about me that I don't normally talk about. Maybe that I'm a big Pilates fan. I love doing Pilates. I do it multiple times a week.
Cool. Good for the core strength there, Douglas, yeah?
That's right.
It's good to have you, Douglas. Thank you so much. And Gustavo, how about you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Gustavo Razzetti. I'm the CEO and founder of Fearless Culture. We are a culture design consultant. So I'm going to start with something that many people don't know about me. I like to cook, but really cook. So I've been actually working in a restaurant at some point, and I cook recipes and food from Thailand, Vietnamese, French, Spain, whatever, Italian. And I think that when it comes to designing the culture of an organization, I use the same principles. I like to improvise and see, okay, what can I cook with the ingredients I have at home? So I think that when we're working on culture, it's trying to leverage the ingredients that are already there, the products that the company has, and try to create something better out of what already is in place.
Wow, that sounds good. And
love the analogy, actually.
Yeah, I've been in Italy many times, and whenever I'm there, the food is always a passion. And I would imagine that an Italian organizational consultant like you, Gustavo, will be a very good one also. So I trust you guys are bringing lots of benefits to your clients because you're thriving companies and also renowned authors. So it's really good to have other authors here with us, right, Martin?
Absolutely, yeah. Again, breadth of perspective is always educational from everybody's point of view. So
absolutely. So over to you, Martin. We'd like to steer the show.
Yeah, well, I start off by saying I love the analogy, Gustavo, of the culinary equivalence of organization and culture. But you know, there's something kind of interesting about culture in general, and that is all of us use the phrase so often, but actually, do we have a shared understanding of what it actually means in an organizational context? And maybe that's a useful place to start. Just your perspective, both of your perspectives on what's your experience of culture. What does it mean? How does it differ place to place? Why does it differ? And then we might lead on to, well, how does that impact hybrid workplaces, which are a bit of a slightly new phenomenon for all of us?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think that culture for me is like a system. So it's a collection of a lot of things, and sometimes we're focusing on one of the elements, and it encompasses the way we feel, our emotions, how we feel about our workplace, the people, our mindsets, how we think about, do we have a aggressive mindset, do we have a negative mindset when it comes to culture, and then the behaviors, which is the most important piece that happens across the board. And it's a system that includes different elements from purpose, values, meetings, how we make decisions. So different elements that sometimes we zoom in into one of them to fix that, but we need to make sure that we don't lose the perspective that, for example, the things that we reward and punish might affect, like, for example, how we run our meetings. So everything is interconnected.
So that system, that interconnected piece from a system perspective is central to culture from your point of view, Gustavo, yeah?
Yes, and we use a framework that I created many years ago that's called the Culture Design Canvas, and basically has all the elements and focus on the core, the emotional culture and functional culture, which includes meeting, decision making. But we always tell clients, when you're fixing one thing or working on one thing, don't lose the bigger picture, because everything's connected.
Yeah, that's interesting. Douglas, your experience of defining culture?
There's two things I just want to double stitch on because they're so critical, and I want listeners to really think really closely about that. The systems that Gustavo mentioned, so critical, and in fact, I named my company Voltage Control off the fact that I always reflected and remarked on how when I'm patching up my modular synthesizer, it always reminded me of working with teams and organizations, because one wire moved one little place has this ripple effect through the whole thing, right? And it's all these complex relationships that evolve and adapt, and we have to be mindful of those things. So I love Gustavo's point around, there's not just the part but the whole, and like local solutions can have big impacts, and are we looking at those different layers? Also love the culinary metaphor. It's one that I use quite often, as well as gardening, because it helps us kind of connect into like what it really means around what we're doing, right? Like what are these recipes we might be bringing in to the situation to help create something, some end product. And I think gardening is another great one, because if we really look at, like, often I hear people say, how do I make the people do this? And I was like, well, you don't make them do anything, just like you don't make a plant grow, right? Like we can create the conditions and foster it. And so the other thing I think is important is something you modeled just now. Well, modeling is really important. If we want good behaviors, we should model those behaviors. And you modeled starting with the question of what is culture. And I think if we don't get to a shared definition early, it doesn't matter what kind of change or what kind of work we're doing, we're starting off at the wrong spot, right? And so getting that understanding really clear early on, because it can mean mean different things to everyone.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. The going back to the culinary analogy, we can start with the same basic ingredients for a dish. So we start off, say, with omelets. And we've got a basic eggs, okay? But there's so many things we can do with eggs apart from an omelette. So if we relate that into an organizational culture setting, are there raw ingredients? Are there basic ingredients that, from your experience in helping to develop or build culture, that can head in much different directions depending on the organization in which they land? And what are those key ingredients that we might focus on?
Gustavo, you wanna run with this one first?
Yeah, let's switch.
Yeah. So, I think values is really, really critical. If we don't start with what we value as a company and what we value as individuals, then I don't know. We're probably fabricating culture or fabricating fun. Connections also really important if we're not thinking about the humans that are there. Because at the end of the day, I would argue that the culture is how the humans relate, how they come together, the behaviors, the norms. I think another ingredient is what are our, I don't know if this is it's strange, right? Because it's not necessarily a constituent part or ingredient, but it's so critical as the feedback loop. So what is our mindset? Maybe that's the right ingredient of how we're kind of folding back our learnings and making sure we're adapting. Those are three that really jump to mind.
Yeah, and actually, Gustavo, you mentioned in your opening comments there the idea of mindset. Is that something that is particularly central to your conception of culture and org culture?
It is, because mindset, people talk about mindset like the growth mindset. There are many mindsets, not just one. And the mindset is like the filter through we see reality. So we have a negative mindset or defeated mindset, we're going to see everything within our company through that lens. So it's important to understand, for example, building on the gardening and culinary metaphors, like many companies have a lot of ingredients already in place, but they don't take care of them. Maybe need to remove some things that are rotten or are not working to make sure that the rest of the plants can thrive. But when the system is screwed up, they say, this is not going to work. So I think that one of our roles when we start working with the clients, it's observing what's working, what's not working, and try to focus on how we build from what's working. Sometimes the mindset of the company is, new leader new sheriff comes to town, and hey, we need to fire everyone, we need to change everything, we need to start. I like to talk about culture evolution rather than culture change. Change feels like we're starting from scratch with throwing everything away and creates a lot of defensive mechanisms, versus a company and a culture, a family culture, the culture of a city, they're always evolving. And we need to leverage that and see how we can take it into evolve it. And the plant's going to grow where they want, but to Douglas' point, we need to create the right environment. We need to help and nurture those plants so they can grow in the right direction.
Is it, just picking up a thread of that, is it reasonable to say that you typically only get asked into a company to work on their culture when there's something seriously going wrong and has probably been going wrong for a fairly serious amount of time? Is that a fair observation?
I would say that that's the majority, but then there's, as I mentioned, change of leadership. So that triggers, hey, we're going to revisit the culture. And then there are companies that probably the leadership team has been there for more than a decade, maybe two, and they feel that they need to refresh the culture. So they define like values or purpose and behaviors that they want to reward many years ago, and they want to say, hey, is this culture still relevant? Do we need to refresh?
Yeah. Douglas, was that your experience of being engaged into that culture change versus culture evolution question?
I think that's a great framing. I love. I really lit up when Gustavo mentioned that. This because it can be quite. Well, I'll say this: any change has a lot of identity wrapped up in it, and people can become really fearful around this loss of identity. And so, if we're talking about we're changing your culture, that could create an identity crisis for the entire organization, or certainly large portions of it, right? And so this notion of evolution, we're not throwing away what works. We're just making a shift around things that aren't serving us. And that comes back to some of the ingredients that are really important, like purpose and vision. If we're not anchoring in on those things, then it's going to be really hard to know what is right, what do we keep and what do we throw out. And then I noticed Jay Shu left in the comments this degree of trust and the effect on culture. And I think that's a really fascinating one, because to me, I would put that under what I could call the values, right? If we value trust and we value what that creates, we'd want to like make sure that's how do we foster that in the culture. And while I'm a big believer, it's an important part of culture. I don't know. Maybe someone out there wants a culture that doesn't have a lot of trust. I don't think I'd want to work there, but I think if you really step back, and what are the essential elements of like defining what's important to you, right? And then having those conversations to build out of that.
Yeah, that concept of trust that's a real tricky one, isn't it? Because
absolutely. But Martin, if I may step in, let me share an episode of a meeting that I was attending yesterday, and again, an hybrid meeting. You know, I think organizations are learning how to behave hybrid in meetings. And it was, I mean, I understand trust is important in culture, but in that case, I noticed a little bit of disrespect in terms of the participants that were outside the meeting room, I were remote. They suddenly cut the meeting without saying even proper goodbyes. I mean, sometimes I wonder if it's the values of being human, regardless of being remote, that are we missing in an organization.
Yeah.
It also comes down to norms, right? Like I've observed teams before that felt they had it all together. You know, they're really polite in the beginning. They said their goodbyes. And then I've observed teams that seem like a total train wreck. And I'm like, what's going on here? Like, I can't even make sense of what's going on. It's chaotic. It's messy. And then I go and I'm talking to the manager and I'm like, hey, you know, one team really seems to be struggling, but the other one has she's like, I totally agree with you. And then when she says a couple of names of the team members, I'm like, hold on a second. Like she's thinking the chaotic team has it together. And it's because they had established these norms. They understood each other. They behaved in these unpredictable ways, but they had a shared understanding. And from the outside, the clinical, like polite, appropriate likeness seemed like they had it more together, but there were knives out when the meetings weren't happening. So I always like to say, if there's more truth in the hallway than in the meeting, we got a problem.
Absolutely, yeah. I use the phrase actually on that point, Douglas. I normally use the phrase walking the corridors. So I normally invite meeting participants to reflect on if things that are not said in the meeting walk the corridors of the organization. We all need to sit up and take note. Are our meetings doing what they're meant to do? That, you know, so it's there is something in that, the idea of those accepted norms. But let me just go back to Gustavo. You made the point, and Douglas, you actually referred to it as well. This concept or notion of, if there's a new leader in town, if there's a new kid on the block, that in some way we have to reflect on, review, or do something with our culture. Or does it actually work slightly in reverse? There is a new leader, but a new culture is going to come no matter what, because it'll generate from the top down. Which in your experience is more prevalent, that a new culture gets driven because of the new boss coming in, or a new boss coming in looks to foster a different culture?
Yeah, I think that culture is like we talk about being a system, being like an organism, right? So you cannot control it, and that's one of the hardest part for leaders. A leader can define certain parameters of how they want the culture to be, but they cannot do with it whatever they want. So this is a nice tension between like a leader coming to a company and probably the leadership style and the culture style of the organization don't match. And that's really something that when we are hiring new leaders, we don't do the activity, the exercise. What type of culture do we have? And what's the right leader to help grow that culture? So sometimes we have culture that are very tribal. People get along very well. Think about a lot of Fortune 500, like P&G, Mars, all the traditional packaging packaged goods companies that basically have been there for ages. They know each other. They feel proud about belonging to that company. And then you have someone that's an external, doesn't understand the codes. They want to change everything. They want to bring their guys. Well, that's going to create a clash. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, because you need sometimes to go through some tension to improve culture. But it's important that leaders understand first what environment they're getting into before they try to impose their style into that. So I think a nice dance that they need to learn how to work together. No, if not, people are going to resist, and then it's going to become the worst of the leader, and the worst of the organization is going to come to life.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So that idea of the boss or the new CEO driving the culture or dictating the culture, is that a fair assessment then, or is that misplacing the role that everybody else in the organization plays in creating culture?
I think that the leader plays a key role in defining it, but they don't own culture. They own it as a responsibility to make sure they have a healthy, positive culture, but they cannot control it. I mean, I use the analogy of a city. So if you're the mayor, you can define certain parameters, where they're going to be parks, if this street is going to be one way, two way, what are the speed limits for people to drive. But in the end, people are going to define if they want to walk, bike, drive, which color of car, which music they're going to be hearing. So finding that balance between setting certain rules so we don't clash, we don't have a car crash, that's part of the leadership. But then we need to leave room for people to choose how they want to behave.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have here some comments from our viewers. Martin, are you aware?
I'm looking at those popping up on the screen there, Paul. Yeah.
Mike Clago is a usual participant. Mike, thank you, and also other colleagues that are here posting. And yeah, how about this tendency for culture to shift the organization? Perhaps we talked enough about culture and not much on hybrid work, but is this really a tendency for hybrid work to kill organizational culture, or is it the opposite?
Good question.
This one's really fascinating because it kind of, and then he also mentioned a HBR article that kind of more specifically talks about, mentions or alludes to the burning platform. So, like, if this isn't working, let's explode it. So we creatively destruct this thing so that we all jump ship. I think that this comes to my favorite answer, a nuance of what Gustavo was saying, which is, the leader can't dictate it, but they need to be looking at it very intently. And Carol mentioned this notion of nurturing the culture. And if it's not top of mind for the leader, if they're not paying attention to it, if they're not seeing this giant cliff, if they're not seeing this platform that's about to explode, then it's going to be really painful. But like, why do we have to get to that point where it's really painful? I just don't believe that we have to get to that point. Like, sure, it's effective. Sure, if we set the whole house on fire, everyone's going to run out. But do we have to? Like Elon Musk, he sent an email saying everyone has to work from home, which, I have my beliefs on why he did that. But it doesn't have to get to that point of extremity, right? Like, we can see these things, we can work toward them, and as leaders, we can invite these conversations. And if we're not inviting these conversations early enough, we can't start evolving the culture, to use Gustavo's point, And so I get pretty passionate about, let's not wait till this is a hair on fire problem. Let's nurture it along the way. And it's the same thing with the gardening metaphor. Do we wait until it's totally infested with insects and we got to spray pesticide on it, or are we doing little preventative measures along the way and watching and observing?
Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts about why Elon Musk did that, because I have my own. But that's
there might be legal ramifications.
For sure, he's not watching. So. He's not watching us.
That's once again, I think that people. So I think that sometimes the burning the bridge might work, but in most of the cases, feels like the leader wants to send a message, and the message that you send, which what you reward and punish, also it's about how you treat people, no? So if you feel that people are stupid or people are not reliable, they're not trustworthy, they're not mature, rather than inviting them to a conversation. If you need to change something, well, guys, this is the new reality. The culture that we had until today helped us get here, but it's not going to help us get into the future. What are the things that we need to change? So I think that smart leaders invite people to that conversation and also hear people and their perspective and incorporate in making those changes. Yeah, culture doesn't mean being comfortable. The friction is always good, but it's friction that we all create, that we all embrace, not that it's imposed on one person. No? So, and lastly, Douglas mentioned the word intentionality. That's critical. So, are you intentionally doing this, or are you doing it just as a leadership reflex? just to show that you're powerful, or because you're a leader you can do whatever. There's a lot of research that shows that we've been rewarding a leadership model of people that are extroverts, that are very aggressive, that are very in your face, that are good persuaders, good communicators, but they're very good. They're very bad leaders. Those are not the leaders. I mean, I know there's a lot of research that shows that all the leaders that we admire, that are on the business books, are not necessarily people. I mean, there was an interesting article about Jack Welch, how we get GE to earn a lot of money, do a lot of things, but now in the long run, the companies suffer. There's a lot of now people are picking up the pieces of their leadership.
Yeah, I think when Douglas, when you mention Elon Musk there, I mean, one of the things that strikes me about some of the interventions that you hear from him, you have to wonder if he's most comfortable, or if any person is most comfortable in a slightly chaotic environment, then if things become a little bit too stable for them, they like to create chaos to create their own comfort zone, because that gives them better power, better status, better ability to manage the chaos rather than trying to manage the stability. Now, maybe that's a personality thing. I'm not quite sure, but it is a feature, and I wonder then, one, the impact that type of personality has on culture, and two, just picking up some of the threads from our listeners and viewers here. Just 2 points. Carol is making the point here about hybrid work will need more intentional action from leaders towards nurturing culture than in-person working. And Gustavo, that's picking up your point there about the intentionality. But Ricardo is picking up a question here about reflecting on Musk's comments. And he's saying there's a huge difference between being a leader that has a vision and a culture in mind versus a manager that leads people in order to achieve that vision. So if we take both of those in the context of our evolving workplaces, hybrid workplaces, what kind of insights might we have about the impact of culture, the impact of the leader on those hybrid working environments?
One thing that jumped to my mind was, as Ricardo was saying, there's a difference between the manager and the leader who's maybe inquisitive and curious, the learner versus the knower. And we often refer to that as like facilitated leadership. Leaders that are showing up with the facilitation mindset, that are putting inquiry above advocacy, and starting to learn and stay curious and adapt. And often people will ask me, what's the best tool for engagement? Or how do we do this or that? Like, everyone wants to know the fresh tooling and the technology. And my favorite thing to say is the best tool for engagement is your ear. If we're not listening, then none of it matters. And the other thing I'll say about the hybrid thing is, I think a really big issue is how we're conflating a lot of different behaviors in the hybrid. And most often when you see the media write about hybrid, they're talking about how many days you're at home versus in the office. And I think they're missing the bigger picture around what's really critical for dialing in culture and collaboration. And that is, how do we support people that are remote and virtual and in different locations? Even if they're in together, what if you got 2 buildings that need to collaborate, and then you've got 2 or 3 people that are home? Supporting those interactions and making sure people are engaged and heard and supported in those moments is not trivial. And I think that they get so hung up on like how many days we're in the office, and frankly, it doesn't matter, because if we should be focused on what matters, and those are the moments where people are doing the work and whether or not they're supported and valued.
Absolutely.
I think that the most important thing is that we still think of like working remotely from home and in the office like a binary terms versus which of those methods work best for what. In the end, it's all about the work. We need to stop thinking about people's schedules, people's arrangement, and it's more what's the work that we want to achieve together, because that's better for a team. When you're doing work that really drives you, that you're passionate about, it's better a metric to predict that people are going to stay in your company than a other typical engagement surveys. On the other hand, based on what Douglas was saying, depending on the type of work, we can do it asynchronously, we can do it remotely, we can do it at work. So if we want to align a team, if we want to build passion around the new vision, where we product that we get together, and we have a conflict that needs to be addressed in person because the team is very toxic, well, but then for other person, we can make decisions really effectively, working from different places, asynchronously, writing a decision-making document, having time to reflect and building on everyone's ideas, and without having to be in the same room. So I think in the end, we need to stop thinking about the one or the other world, but saying what's the best of each and how can we bring them together. And also flexibility is not just about where do you work from, but also flexibility of schedule. People have different needs, different personalities, and people that have to take care of kids or the relatives, or people that are young, they're starting a career, probably want to be more on the office so they can learn from others. So each group has different needs. We need to be flexible.
Well, we have here another comment by Carol, and we have a busy viewers this time, Martin, for a change.
Yeah.
And this is good to have the sense of belonging. I'm wondering, of course, the sense of belonging in a hybrid team. Would that mean that the manager will have to be extra careful? And sometimes I'm not sure if the managers are ready to take this extra burden for the hybrid team to be more effective. This is a question for our guest speakers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In your views, are managers ready to become extra careful with an hybrid workforce? And
I think there's a journey, right? I think there's a maturity curve. Some managers are. I would say the broad majority aren't, because if you look at what a manager is, specifically the term manager, I think of managers, in the world of like innovation consulting, we often refer to it as the frozen middle, because the people on the ground want to innovate, the leaders want to innovate, but you got this management layer, and their whole function in the world is to do what we did yesterday exactly the same way as we did it yesterday. So there's a lot of resistance to change at that layer, because they're there to manage things. They're there to keep it consistent, to reduce risk, et cetera. And so, sure, you'll have outliers. You'll have plenty of folks that are curious, but if they're really staying true to their identity, they're trying to support the old ways of doing things. And I think that's something that they have to struggle with, and that's where organizations like ours and Gustavo's, where we're coming in and helping have some of those dialogues and poke at some of those things and ask curious questions around how might this be a little different, as to support. Or even folks listening to conversations like this, they get a little curious and try things. But it's a journey. It's not like you just flip a switch and you're instantly able to do these things. They have to practice and experiment with supporting people. And specifically the belonging piece, I think that is a mindset that we really have to foster, because it's not a matter of just saying that, oh, let's put in some policies. We have to model that every day. We have to make sure that we're creating space. Like, who haven't we heard from? Does everyone feel complete? Even the way we do one-on-one meetings, like making sure that people really feel heard and valued.
Yeah. I was going back to the beginning. I always like to reflect on what we were talking about, and Douglas mentioned something about the pandemic and now working remotely, hybrid, whatever you want to call it. It basically amplified when it comes to company culture, things that were really wrong. So when people say, "Hey, I need to fix my hybrid meetings," well, they're in-person meetings that are really broken, So the same happens with culture. I think that many leaders understand that culture matters. Leaders and managers, they talk about it, but then they're not ready. They're not prepared to design a culture, what it takes from them to build a strong, healthy environment so the plants can grow. And they don't want to admit it. And very few people talk about this. Now that we're in a hybrid environment that requires more intentionality, different arrangements, people that are in the room, people that are not, people that maybe they joined the team and we never saw them in person. Well, how do we manage all those complexities? It's not complicated, but complex how we manage the complexity and make sure that they're not ready. Most of the leaders and managers are not necessarily ready. They are better because they learn some tricks, but they're not ready to switch and become more of a facilitator of that culture. No, rather than try to be the one that's going to fix all the problems, they need to be more mindful. How do we create that sense of belonging that's critical for teams to do great work?
And that's reflecting back, Gustavo, to one of your earliest points, which was this idea of the organization as a system, the culture as a system. So it's not that it's all made up of discrete individual parts. It's made up of relationships between all of those parts. And if you affect one, you affect all. So it's I suppose having the vision and having the maturity to be able to see that it's not just about pulling individual strings, but then I suppose one of the things that are hybrid, like I take the point that you made, both of you made the point earlier, that hybrid is not just about how many hours in the office, how many hours at home. But COVID kind of forced everybody to think about hybrid in a way that I would suggest we never had to think about it previously. Previously, we evolved into different versions of hybrid working, which we kind of took for granted. But COVID forced everybody to look at the same issue at the same time. I think as we emerge from it, organizations are finding very different ways to interpret hybrid and then to manage or deal with hybrid. So I suppose a key question in my mind then is the original organization culture, is that driving responses to the new requirements of hybrid working, or is it the reverse? Are new hybrid working demands and requirements forcing underlying culture change into our organizations?
Great question, Martin.
Yeah.
Or is it a bit of both? Is that a hen and egg question that we'll have to wait another while for more clarity to come out of it?
But while probably our guest speakers need some time to reflect, let me throw in something, Martin, that probably
Sure.
you'd like also to put in the equation. Is what I fear the most is sometimes we are like blind flying. We have no instruments for culture, and this is something that sometimes I wonder is how do we gauge if we have the kind of culture we really want, first of all, and what is it the metrics that we need to have in place if we want to have some change in culture, right? So this is both for both of you, and don't forget about the previous question from Mark.
Absolutely. I think that one thing that's important to make sure that we're not putting all together or mixing is the pandemic forced people to work from home. And I emphasize working from home because we couldn't go to many places. So it was remotely, but mostly from home. And it was a one size fits all. So basically in the past, we all work in the office, then we're all forced. It wasn't a decision. We were forced for health issues to work from home. When it comes to hybrid, now we have to make a choice. Leaders have to make a choice. Are we going to force people back to the office? Are we going to embrace now, like many companies say, no, now we're going to continue working fully remotely, or are we going to create a different model? Are we going to have a one-size-fits-all model for hybrid, or are we going to let each team define their model based on the type of work that they do, the type of services that they offer? No? So I think that's the most important thing, that now they need to make a choice, and that's where leaders are failing. They don't want to make that choice, so they're defaulting to what used to work for them. Most leaders that are in the, let's say, upper 60s or 50s, whatever, they want people to go back because first, they don't trust people, so they do it by visibility. They want to see people. If people are busy, they are there, they're working. But also for them, being at the office, it's like I have my corner office, people salute me, I have my receptionists, like a different assistant, so it feels like powerful. It's what they are used to. The younger people need to be more in person because they need to learn from others, they need to model, they need to, hey, I'm here, I want to grow. But then the people that are with kids, that segment, or people that are in the 50s or 45ish, they don't want to go back to the office, or not as often as their leaders want. So that's where the complexity comes. Is different people have different needs, different expectations, And leaders, rather than try to impose one model, need to understand the complexity and try to find a solution. No?
It's something that came up for me was this, we were doing hybrid before the pandemic, and I would say most companies were doing hybrid pretty poorly. Like if you ever had a doctor's appointment the same day as the all hands meeting, or just happened to be out of the office, and they had the star phone sitting on the conference room table, and you experienced that, it was, you were a second class citizen. And I think one of the things that the pandemic brought to us, this was realization of what it's like to be on the receiving end of that, and the possibility of how much better it can be. And so I think people's expectations have risen. And so we're going to require more and more inclusion when we talk about the experiences that show up, or people are going to opt out of them, which I think is great, right? Because we're going to demand better. And there's some comments in the thread here around companies that had good culture before are fine, and it comes back to my comments around why we wrote Magical Meetings and the thinking behind sharing these fundamental behaviors around having better meetings, because we believe that that's where a lot of your culture manifests, right? The meetings are where we actually come together, where we spend the time as multiple humans together at work. I mean, sure, interactions happen over email, et cetera, but by and large, we're having meetings, and so how we behave and the norms we establish there are really critical. And hybrid and remote just throw some technology layers on top and throw some curveballs, but we got to have the underlying beliefs and behaviors in place. So things like, hey, let's actually respect each other. Let's be hard on ideas but soft on people. Let's actually not have a meeting if we don't have a clearly articulated purpose. All of these things that I think are kind of some fundamental behaviors that if we get down to, we can start to have higher engagement, higher connection, better understanding between each other.
Yeah, it's complex, isn't it? And again, I'm really struck, Gustavo, by your opening comment, which is this concept of system. I have to confess, I'm guilty. It's a topic really close to my heart, because that's where I invested quite a lot of my research interests back, kind of 8-10 years ago. If I could try and do a very quick recap of just some of the key points that we've reflected on, and then Paul might take us into a closing round. But so that's the first one, this idea that if we're part of a system, there is no one part of it that's dominant, because all parts affect all other parts. The concept of culture as part of that system, and then the impact that culture might have on hybrid working, begs a question. Two questions. Do we all share the understanding of culture? Douglas, you made that particular point. And two, which came much later, do we all share the understanding of hybrid? Hybrid is not just about being in the office or not in the office. So maybe on two fronts, all leaders, managers need to take a little step back and reflect on, do we have a shared understanding of those two critical components in this particular conversation? The next key point that I took out of the early part of our conversation is, it's not about imposing or deciding what the culture will be. It's about creating the environment and the conditions within which a positive culture can emerge. Because both of you, I think, emphasized the idea that culture evolves. It doesn't start or end. It's an evolutionary process. And because of that, the constant creation and recreation of positive conditions for positive culture is more important than actually trying to impose a predetermined culture. Just some of the ingredients, going back to our metaphor, our culinary metaphor, we talked about values, we talked about connections, behaviors, and norms. Feedback loops, Douglas, I think you made the point about feedback loops as being critically important to keep ourselves self-aware. Because if we're not self-aware, big risk, we might just go into a culture cul-de-sac. that may serve nobody's uses. And finally, a comment that actually quite a number of our listeners referred to is the concept of trust. And I suppose trust from the top, that actually our people are good, our people want to engage, they want to work, and giving them a bit of space probably serves everybody's interest rather than trying to clamp down. That's part and parcel of the culture, is the degree to which people trust each other. The shared understanding we've talked about. Key point, and I think Gustavo, you made this point. Culture is not something that you can control, but it is something that you can influence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's almost counterintuitive, particularly for managers who might see their job as, I got to control because that's what I'm being paid to do. Whereas a leader actually often doesn't want to control. They want to inspire, they want to motivate, they want to promote, but they don't necessarily want to control. So that idea of influencing the culture, to influence the hybrid working arrangements, is probably more important than the concept of trying to impose. A final observation or comment that I took out of it is this concept of intentionality. And again, some of our listeners referred to it. Gustavo, you particularly emphasized it. But the concept of what your intention is, and I suppose making it clear what the intention is an essential part of building a positive culture. And then in the context of the hybrid working environment, so I'm now use hybrid in its broadest sense, multiple ways in which we can interact and engage and work. So that intentionality, if that's brought to the fore, we probably have a better chance of co-building a positive working environment that can be hybrid or can be unitary. But if we have that shared intentionality, if we trust in each other, then we probably give ourselves the best chance of building something really positive.
Absolutely. Wow, amazing summary, and without notes. Have you noticed? Without written notes. Anyway, so we are very close to the end of the program here. Thank you so much, dear guest speakers, for being with us. But without closing the broadcast here, I would like you to take these last minutes to, if someone was not joining the show except for these last minutes, and we even without listening this brilliant summary from Martin, what is the key point you'd like to offer a manager today? What is the key point you're offering a manager today? Douglas,
you want to go first, Douglas? Or
Sure, yeah. There was a comment that kind of came through. I believe it might have been from Mike around organizations get the behaviors they reward. And this comes down to, like, we often talk about incentives, right? What are we incentivizing? And this especially plays out when we've got the key performer that's just the biggest asshole. Like, I don't know how you guys feel about curse words on your show, but I think it's important to, like, really drive home how horrible this person is, but they're just bringing in the revenue. And I'll tell you, that is insidious for culture. And if you're managing someone like that, know that they are disrupting the rest of your team. And you're sending the incentive to them that, like, it's okay for you to be abused or misheard, unsupported, because this person amazing at what they do or whatever. And I think as managers, we got to root out that stuff. We got to incentivize and model the behaviors we want, and to really key into to how do we support the teams to do their best work. And it's really about unleashing their potential.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that.
I love it. Yeah, culture is what we reward and punish, so not what we say it is. For me, going back and zoom out into the system, I think that leaders need to embrace a paradox, which is flexibility and discipline. So thriving in this hybrid workplace requires embracing flexibility. Let people design their work schedule, let people design how they want to do their work, and also understand that different teams will have different needs, and that's okay. How can you reconcile those? But on the other hand, we need to be very disciplined in terms of how you facilitate meetings, how you facilitate for inclusion, how you make sure that you're not promoting people that are just present or closer to a leader versus people that work from home, but maybe they deliver the goods even better than others. No, so that's we leaders need to be more intentional, and really requires a lot of rigor. We want to have better meetings, but then it's okay, and we will say, well, people arrive late, and it's okay. It's okay if people multitasking. It's okay if people come in and out without being involved, and then people have to reconnect and send them a status of what was discussed because they weren't paying attention. So if we continue letting those behaviors being okay, then we're never going to improve. So discipline is critical. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but if leaders don't start saying, hey guys, we need to behave as a team and we need to abide by that kind of rule of engagement. So flexibility and discipline is my advice for leaders.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, and we have to go. Martin, any last word you'd like to share here?
No, that again, it's another one of our examples, Paul. Of we started off with no script, we didn't have any pre-prepared questions, we had no agendas, but we had a really, really engaging and interesting conversation. Gents, thank you very, very much for your time. I thoroughly enjoyed the interaction, and certainly I've learned a couple of things that I will go away and reflect on in my own consulting work and my own environment. So thank you very much. Really enjoyed that chat.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll leave here stronger. And also thank you to dear viewers for your comments and participation. It's really amazing to be in this metaverse space with all of you. I hope you enjoyed the program, and see you next month with more another episode of Talk to Your Meeting Daughters. Goodbye for now.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.